Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Donna Seymour. I'm a member of the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters, one of the civic partners for our show. My guest today is a return guest, Moriah Engelberg from A Better Balance. She's the organizer for the campaign to improve disability benefits in New York State. Moriah, welcome back. Great to have you with us. This is going to be an opportunity to talk about the critical status during this part of the budget year, some really important programs for workers here in New York State, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and really looking forward to diving in about this really important topic.
Great, thank you. So let's remind folks, Mariah, about the work A Better Balance does. What kind of things does your organization tackle on behalf of workers?
A Better Balance is a national nonprofit that uses the power of the law to fight for workers and their families. We have a free confidential legal helpline for workers to contact if they ever run into problems. If they're facing issues with pregnancy discrimination, pregnancy accommodation, if they need to take time off of work to care for themselves or their families. And I will just make sure everybody has that helpline number, which is 1-833-NEED-ABB, 1-833-633-3222. And we work to ensure that people are able to take the care that they need for themselves without ever having to sacrifice their health for a paycheck. So a lot of paid family and medical leave across the country. And paid sick time across the country as well, pregnancy accommodation, fair scheduling laws, and much, much more. So a lot of really critical work for workers across the country.
So thank you for that, and I'll be sure to put that phone number in our show notes so people will be able to access
Great.
it. So we're in the middle of a tough budget here in New York because of the absolute chaos at the federal level. We know the congressional budget bills are planning critical cuts to programs in health and safety in order to fund additional tax breaks for the uber wealthy. For example, here in New York, 21, which takes in 15 of the poorest counties in New York State, 32% of constituents receive some form of Medicaid funding, which is one of the programs being eyed for draconian cuts. That not only includes critical health care for everybody from infants to seniors, but it also helps to keep seniors and the disabled receiving home care and other essential services, which we know are far more cost effective at home than they are in nursing home placements. And this is true, of course, of every congressional district. Why are programs in New York State like TDI, temporary disability insurance, and PFL, paid family leave, so critical to keep and adequately fund? Who's benefiting from these programs, Mariah?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And to just take a little bit of a step back for a brief second, paid family leave allows you to take paid protected time off in New York State to take care of a loved one or to bond with a new child. You're entitled to up to 12 weeks of this paid protected leave, up to 67% of your paycheck, up to a statewide average weekly wage of 67%. You're guaranteed to have your health insurance. You're able to take this leave intermittently. So if you're taking somebody to the doctor for a week, you go back to work, you take your family member to the doctor the next week for a long critical condition or that time to bond with a new family member. Or you would take something if for you yourself, if you yourself are the person who is the seriously sick, ill, or injured person with a chronic condition or maybe a new diagnosis like a cancer diagnosis, you would be taking something called temporary disability insurance or TDI. Our current TDI program only offers workers $170 a week for in job compensation. There's no guarantee of health insurance, there's no guarantee of job protection, and you can't take that leave intermittently. I don't think I have to tell you that $170 a week in 2025 is not nearly enough money for an individual, let alone a family. So the distinction between those two, the paid family leave is you take that to take care of another person, and the temporary disability insurance you use to take care of yourself. And so the long and short of this is that every single person may need to take TDI at some point in their life. It's really hard for us to think about maybe becoming temporarily disabled and needing to take time off of work, but the reality is that any one of us could have any kind of health issue that requires us to take time off for ourselves. And in the same respect, any one of us also may have loved ones that need to take that time off, and we are their caretakers for them. So the long and short of it is really that these programs, whether or not we want to think about them as something that we are planning on using, touch every single one of our lives. And, you know, it's critical to have that in the case that you need it. We hope you don't. We hope everything you never need to take it. But the reality is that many of us may need to take some form of temporary disability insurance. And in that sense, if you're taking TDI, you likely have somebody in your life who is trying to help you, a loved one who's helping to take care of you. So the answer is it's really genuinely every single New Yorker.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that. And anybody who thinks about this for any length of time at all can come up with stories in their own life about when they needed help, they needed to give help, or they were unable to work for whatever reason. So these really are critical programs. So you oversee the campaign to improve disability benefits in New York. So in 2025, what are you asking the state to include in these two programs this year? Because every year you need to look again at what's being offered. And obviously the $170 is a laughable benefit in this day and age. So what are you asking for this year?
Yeah, this year we're really focusing on making sure that we can bring the level of paid medical leave of TDI into the 21st century. And I say this by saying that TDI actually hasn't been touched since 1989. The last time that this bill was touched was in 1989. The reason why we're stuck at that 170 number, I'm not a lawyer, but I have learned do not write numbers into a bill because they do not index for inflation. So we're stuck in this 1989 relic, and we're bringing workers into the 21st century. At this point, we're not necessarily fighting for the whole, you know, dog and pony show of paid medical leave reform. We would love to continue to build that roadway to make sure that we're creating the most comprehensive program. But right now we're really looking to remove that $170 a week cap. Nobody can live on it. And make sure that if you're taking TDI, you're able to have your health insurance be continue while you're taking it. We want to make sure that your job is going to be protected, and we want to make sure that you're able to take that leave intermittently. TDI requires medical documentation. It is something that you have to have a medical reason for taking it. And that medical reason can be all sorts of things. I mean, I know in New York State, we have an opioid crisis. If you are somebody who needs to take time off of work to address that, you would be eligible to take temporary disability insurance. But the way that the program works right now is that you can actually be fired for taking time off to take care of yourself. Once you're fired, you lose your health insurance in the middle of a health crisis. And to top it off, you don't have any real income coming in. It's unacceptable that we have this program in 2025. So we are really trying to make sure that we're removing that $170 a week cap. And we're going to not write in a number this time, but make sure that you have ultimately, after a period of 5 years, a phase in, workers would be eligible to receive up to 67% of their paycheck, up to a cap of 67% of the statewide average weekly wage. So that would mirror what our paid family leave program is right now, which right now is just a bit under $1,200 a week, and ensure that people's health insurance stays, their job is there for them when they return back from work, and also that they can take that leave off in chunks. This is really critical for people who are living with chronic illness or chronic disease. For example, if you receive a cancer diagnosis, maybe you want to take 1 week off to prepare for chemo, get your chemo treatments, recover, and then the next week you might want to go back to work because it's might feel very important for you to continue that level of normalcy. So that piece, that intermittent leave piece is actually is quite critical. And it exists in paid family leave, so it really should exist in TDI as well.
Right. So what we're talking about is bringing these two programs into comparable numbers. Certainly the fact that TDI hasn't been touched in 36 years is insane. It's just, it just doesn't make any sense that it hasn't been. So, Moriah, let's talk about how these two programs are paid for.
That's a great question. So one of the things that's actually interesting about temporary disability insurance and paid family leave is actually entirely worker funded. So workers actually pay for those premiums 100% through their paycheck. This is different from how TDI is funded. Since its inception, which was 1949, temporary disability insurance has been a shared cost program between workers and their companies. And TDI actually was created, it's been a long-standing program in New York. It was created in 1949, and the last time we touched it was 1989, and really hoping that the last time we touch it won't be 2029, but here we are. So the idea for temporary disability insurance and the funding is that it is a shared cost program between workers and their employers. And ultimately, we find that offering workers paid leave is actually quite beneficial to businesses. And ultimately, after 5 years, this is going to be a 60-40 split between 60% of that is going to be covered by the workplace and 40% is covered by workers. And that is partially because workers pay 100% for paid family leave. And also because it's been that way forever.
Yeah, so that makes sense. And it's a cost sharing program, and so that doesn't put the burden on anybody to 100%. And so that makes a lot of sense. So how do people access these plans, and are there barriers that are standing in their way right now?
Yes, great question. I think, in terms of if anybody ever has any trouble accessing this plan, I will once again flag our helpline. Our lawyers are fantastic and making sure that people can kind of get through the weeds, because it can be very complicated and confusing. There's a lot of back and forth. Maybe with you, your job, your insurance company, it's not a particularly easy program because it's confusing. There's a lot of disconnection in terms of, for example, a lot of people might think that they're eligible for paid family leave, but what really happens is that they're only eligible for temporary disability insurance. I was a caseworker for 5 years in a social service agency before I started this job. And I always assumed that paid family leave also covered yourself, because why wouldn't it? Which is not true. And so that can honestly be one of the barriers, is that a lot of people don't necessarily know that this program exists. But on the flip side of that, a lot of people don't know that this program exists because it's not a workable benefit for people. $170 a week, you can lose your job, you can lose your health insurance, all in the middle of when you need your health insurance the most. A health crisis is not something that people can actually take. So honestly, the benefit level being so low is a huge barrier. We hear from helpline callers who end up sacrificing their health for a paycheck because they can't. There are no other options. It's not a workable wage for people. And at the same time, we also hear from people who are forced to live on that $170 a week because they can't. There's no other option. I mean, it really forces people into this absolutely impossible choice. And that is a significant barrier for a lot of people too, is just that this benefit level is not workable. I mean, to tell somebody like, yeah, by the way, you can take this, and also you might be facing job loss, health insurance loss, who knows how much that could cost you. So that's a really significant barrier in and of itself.
That's right. And we know that anytime anybody has a health crisis, that it takes time to get through whatever the process is that you have to get through to get better. And to sit there and to say people, I'm sorry, you can't take the time you need to return to full health. It just doesn't make sense in a society that needs healthy workers, because we
Yes.
really need people to be healthy, don't
Yes.
we? So,
Yes. And it ends up costing businesses a significant amount of money if you don't have a healthy workforce, as well. I mean, there have been studies that show that it can be really detrimental to the workforce if you have people who are showing up to work and are not at their best, and not being able to take the time that they need to rest, to recover, to get their treatment, to go to their doctor's appointments is detrimental for everybody. TDI is a benefit for every single person, in
and
any way you look at it.
And we know what happens is that if you don't follow through on the healthcare recommendations that you get, you don't recover as well, you don't recover as quickly, and you may end up with more long-term health problems. So really, this is something that we ought to be doing, because if we care about having workers work, they've got to be healthy enough to work, don't they? So
Yep.
so these are really important programs, but they both need to be improved and they need to be modernized. We hoped this was going to start to happen last year. It didn't happen. What is the campaign goal for this year to make, what's your ask of the legislators?
Yeah, and that is, we're really, this policy needs to be done, and it needs to be done now. Ultimately, this has to change. We cannot have a TDI program that was created in 1989 for workers living in 2025 and beyond. We are, unfortunately, we were not included in the Assembly One House budgets. TDI was included in the Senate One House budget, but not in the Assembly. We are really, really, really hoping that we can continue to advocate for this policy to be done, period, full stop. In however we can get this done, whether it's, continuing through budget negotiations, whether it's continuing through, a standalone bill, workers need a modernized temporary disability insurance program that fits their needs. So ultimately, we're going to be fighting to get this done in any way we can. And it, might, maybe tomorrow I'll have a different answer for you, but ultimately, with the landscape of what's going on in Albany, but ultimately we're really hoping to get this done, and we're fighting to get this done in any way possible, in any way, shape, or form.
It's really hard when the executive budget doesn't conclude it and the assembly budget doesn't include it. Only one budget actually includes it. So, Moriah, how can people help to advocate for these changes? What do you need the average citizen to do? And who should we contact, and what is our message?
That's a great question. Everybody should be speaking to their assembly members, calling their assembly members and letting them know that you are a constituent and you are urging the assembly member to speak to leadership to make sure that A84, which is the bill number that carries basically the legislation that would change what we've been talking about, is carried by Bill A84. And ultimately, we are really hoping that people will we're encouraging people to contact their assembly members to push for this legislation to be done. And if they want to do it in the budget, please push for this to be done in the budget, and to continue to make as much noise as possible, and to tell people in your life that this is a policy that exists. So this is something that we've been really, please call your assembly member, call your reps, call the speaker of the assembly, call everybody to say that this has to be done. We cannot be expecting workers to live in a law that was made in 1989. So to really make as much noise as possible to your assembly members, and to also thank Senate leadership for including this, and to really kind of get the phone lines for the assembly up and running, to let them know that you're a constituent and this is something that you're not happy with, and none of us should be.
One of the most effective advocacy tools is often the personal story, because then that puts a human face on a bill number, which
Yes.
sometimes is difficult for senators and assembly members. There's so much on their plates. If they aren't touched by something personally, it may not be high on their priority list. But people who can tell their own story and really bring this home it's a great tool, isn't it?
Yes. And so if anybody has taken temporary disability insurance and would like to share their story and lend their voice for advocacy, I would please reach out to us. We know that this is also a sensitive topic. But this is something that people need to understand. It impacts real people. So of course, if anybody hears this and they've taken temporary disability insurance, or alternatively, they haven't taken it because the consequences of $170 a week, losing your job, losing your health insurance is too scary. Like, please let us know. It is, thank you so much for bringing up that point. It's really true. It's the personal connection we can kind of share these numbers as much as we want, but until you have somebody who's up front saying to you, look, this is what happened to me and it's not right. And we don't have to, there's no reason for this policy to continue to exist in the shape that it has today. So yes, thank you. Great. Great.
Well, great point. Yes, one of the things that is so particularly disturbing right now about what is going on at the federal government is these programs are being axed left and right by people who apparently have no hearts, and they don't suffer personally from these decisions, so they make them and just say it's all about numbers. Well, it isn't about numbers. It's about real live human beings, and we're lucky here in New York that at least we have some programs to fall back on, even if they're not perfect. But this is an important time for state representatives to step up to the plate and say, we can't count on the feds. We've got to make sure we take care of New Yorkers ourselves. And so these are two great programs that, with a little bit of time, attention, and care, could continue to make a real difference for people, couldn't they?
It is really significant difference. Also just thinking about the stress of going through a health crisis, a health shock, it's not good for you either. This is really like a very holistic way to ensure that people are actually able to take the care that they need, and the times that they really need it.
Well, and we know one of the things that happens to people when they get into a health crisis is they can have a lot of medical debt. And with no income coming in, or being afraid to take time off when you really absolutely need to, it just adds to that trauma, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's a real recipe for disaster.
So, Moriah, as we conclude here today, why don't you, if you've got any final thoughts, this is the perfect time to share them. These are two really important programs, and we just need to get behind them as citizens, and we need to encourage our legislatures to understand how important they are to us, don't we?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for having me. And I really just, if it's possible, I think to have people to really sort of sit and think about what it would mean to them if they were diagnosed with a new diagnosis, they break their legs, they have any kind of health crisis, what it might mean to be faced with living with $170 a week, potentially losing your health insurance, potentially losing your job, the inability to take the leave when you need it, and to relay what those emotions and feelings are to your representatives and let them know that this is not acceptable. There's no reason for this to happen. We have the ability to change it. We have a plan, and we just have to get it done. And so I'm really encouraging people to speak to their assembly members, to speak to their representatives, to speak to their senators, to speak to anybody who will listen about that. This is a really important piece of legislation for workers across the state.
And the other person that we should be speaking to is the governor, because the governor
Absolutely.
is in a position to make a lot of things happen when she delivers her executive budget. She didn't do that this year.
Yep.
Again, didn't do that this year. And certainly anybody who's involved in the care economy or who needs care themselves really expects that someone should care.
Yes. 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 And everybody and anybody who will listen, and that absolutely includes the governor. So thank you for bringing that up as well.
Well, thank you, Moriah, for coming back on the show. I hope I wish we had better news from last year, but all we can do is keep informing people and letting them know that there is more work to be done and that they themselves can be a positive voice for change if they will contact their reps. So
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much
you're very
for taking
welcome.
the time.
Very welcome. Always happy to have you on the show. So these conversations are a production of North Country Matters. It is a civic collaboration between the League of Women Voters of St. Lawrence County and the Potsdam Public Library. Until next time, remember, our North Country matters.